Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. It's now time for my meta predictions for Sacramento Regionals. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about everything that's going to go down, I think, at Sacramento. What deck's going to be popular, what decks might make top 8, what decks have the best chance of winning the tournament, all that stuff. All the predictions are going to be within today's video. Of course, Surging Sparks Legal. Super excited for this tournament. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to be including my meta-analysis, just basically breaking down what I think the day one meta is going to look like with how popular each deck is going to be. And if y'all are new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 19K subs. And if you go on to enjoy the video, leave a like. Let me know what you think is going to go down at Sacramento Regionals in terms of top decks and all that stuff. What decks are going to win and all that gravy. But we'll start things off here with Regidrago. Now, I think Regidrago is still the best deck going into this tournament. It might not be the best deck in the format, but I do think Regidrago is by far and away the best play for the tournament. I think it just kind of beats everything in the format. Like, it can beat everything in the format anyways. And I also think that with Lost Box getting a lot of hype, I think Lost Box is actually going to be very popular in Sacramento this weekend. I think that Drago might be a no-brainer of a play. I think that there's a good chance a lot of the big players going to this tournament are going to be on Regidrago. I would make a bet that some of the top players are playing Drago this weekend. I think the deck is still very strong in this format. It still kind of does everything it needs to do, and like I said, it can beat anything in the format, which what makes it so strong. But that's not saying Lost Box isn't going to be popular. I do think this Lost Box Pikachu deck is legit, and I can definitely see a spike in Lost Box's play rate. I mean, it went from like a 4% deck at LEIC, and I think it is now going to potentially go up to probably, well, we'll talk about that soon. But yeah, I do think that Lost Box Pikachu is a very real deck. I think Lost Zone variants in general are going to be popular. People are just high on Lost Box, and I think that Drago, well, I think it's going to be good for the tournament. Not everyone's going to be playing Drago. Also, people want to play, like, new stuff. Some people that may have been wanting to play Drago might just want to play something else instead, because they want to play new cards. They don't want to play the same old boring Drago 60 going into this tournament. That could, help Lost Box. I think Lost Box is very strong for this tournament. I do think the Pikachu Lost Box deck is very real and a very powerful deck. And, yeah. Definitely a good chance Pikachu Lost Box gets top 8. I think that there's a very good chance Pikachu Lost Box makes it to top 8. And then, of course, we do have Miraidon. I think Miraidon is another deck that the hype has kind of fallen down a little bit, but I think this deck is still very legit. I don't know why this deck is not doing better than it should be, because I think Miraidon is like a very real deck right now, too. I think this deck is also very scary. Also, very good chance this is popular in Sacramento. A lot of people like playing these big turbo basic decks. I think Miraidon, it's probably the best of the turbo decks you can play right now. While I don't think it's as strong as Raging Bolt is in theory, I think Miraidon is still very good. It does more in a game. I think the big answer with this deck is just having access to cards like Iron Hands EX, having the Raikou, being able to play Raichu again is really, really good. That makes your Charizard matchup slightly better. So, yeah, very good chance Miraidon ends up being popular in Sacramento. Would not be surprised if we saw a couple Miraidon do pretty good. Another deck that wouldn't, I wouldn't be surprised if one of these got top 8. It's a very good deck, and I think Miraidon's, going to come back into the meta with this new set. Then, of course, we got Raging Bolt. Raging Bolt is still going to be the most popular deck in the room, in my opinion. Like, that ain't changing. And I don't think Raging Bolt will be as popular as it used to be. I feel like the deck gets slightly worse with Surging Sparks, but if Regidrago is still very popular or playable or people are still going to be on it, I think Raging Bolt is still good. I mean, it actually boasts a pretty good matchup versus Miraidon and Regidrago. Your Lost Zone Pikachu matchup is slightly unfavored because they have Blood Moon or Saluna. Plus, Pikachu can be a problem. But you do have Slitherwing. Slitherwing is really good against Pikachu. It can one-shot it and go through the ability. So I think you are still unfavored into the Lost Box deck just because they just Blood Moon you 3 times. But yeah, Raging Bolt is still a very strong deck. I think Raging Bolt is still going to be very popular. Arguably the most played deck in the room still. Like, still good chance it's the only deck that's over 10% of the meta. So yeah, expect to see a lot of Raging Bolt this weekend too. Then, of course, is Charizard. I think Charizard is actually still well-positioned in this new format. I think it just kind of does the usual Charizard things. I do have Gabriel Fernandez's LEIC winning list here pulled up, but I do think the LEIC build that Jackson played with the Secret Box also fairly strong. Also, Precious Charizard might make a name for itself. I do think a lot of people who have been sticking with Charizard for this past formats are probably going to just run it back at Sacramento. The deck still seems like a strong play. Like, it's Charizard. It's never going to be a bad deck, in my opinion. Yeah, it does have a shaky Drago matchup, and outside of that, I think this deck beats everything else in the format. I think if you were to play one copy of Canceling Clone in your deck, I think your Lost Zone matchup if you play Manaphy and Cologne, I think you beat Lost Box. So Charizard still seems like it's a great deck in this format, and I wouldn't be surprised if Charizard still did well. Maybe even a top 8 run. It's possible. Charizard still seems good, and if we are going to see more big basic decks like the Miraidon, the Gouging Fire, the Raging Bolt, the Turbo Moon, very good chance Charizard ends up just being a strong play for this tournament, so wouldn't be surprised if we saw a lot of Charizard. I think Charizard will be popular at this tournament. Terapagos, kind of the, I did a top 5 TikTok short video for my YouTube channel. I think by the time this video goes up, that'll already be live. And I was debating whether or not I wanted Charizard or Terapagos at number 5. I think both decks are probably the number 5 deck right now in the format. Terapagos is still doing Terapagos things. I think it's still a very solid play for this tournament. I think if you were to play Manaphy / Double Bouffalon, I think you're probably beating most of the decks above it. I think your Miraidon matchup's really good because if you go Double Bouffalon, you can deny the Iron Hands knockout potentially, and then you can go Terapagos Swing. You can win the prize trade that way. There's a lot of really cool things you can do with Double Boof in this format. I think Terapagos is still a very powerful deck right now. I think it's still going to be fairly played by some of the top players. Good chance like DDG or whatever plays Terapagos again. I think it's going to be popular, and I wouldn't be surprised if one did get top 8. And then Gardevoir. Now, this was another thing. I was like, is Gardevoir actually the number 5 deck in the format? I think Gardevoir is still very strong, but I'm not going to call it the number 5. I'm going to call it maybe the de facto number 6. But yeah, Gardevoir still doing Guardy things with the secret box still being the optimal way to play it, I think. Like, Turbo Guardy still as good as ever. I will say this, though. This deck does take a pretty bad Miraidon matchup. Miraidon is looking more popular for this tournament. That's like the one thing about playing Guardy is you have to deal with both Drago and Miraidon and Lost Box, which are all fairly bad matchups for Gardevoir. So I don't know if Gardevoir isn't in the best spot going in this tournament. I do think it's still very good and played, by the right player. This deck can still win a tournament. I just don't think it's going to be popular enough, and I also don't think it's the right time to play Gardevoir. Next up is Lugia, which is crazy enough falling off a little bit, I feel like, but Lugia is still really good. I mean, it's still basically the strongest deck in the room if you get turn 2 double Archeops established. Lugia is still a very broken deck. I will say, though, it does have to adapt to potentially Lost Box Pikachu, which is a bad matchup, due to the fact that Pikachu, basically, you can't one-shot a Pikachu, because there's no attack in the deck that can break its ability, so Lugia might have to cook to figure out how you're beating that Lost Box matchup, because that matchup seems like it's pretty bad. And also, the other thing with Lugia is Miraidon. If Miraidon makes a resurgence, which I 100% think we're going to see a Miraidon resurgence this weekend, Lugia is going to be an even worse play for this tournament. So I think Lugia's stonks are falling down a little bit. I think the deck is still very strong. It's not a bad play. It's just, if you hit a lot of the lightning stuff, like the Thorns, the Miraidons, the Pikachu Lost Zone decks, you're going to have a bad day. But I think Lugia is still good. Or if you can figure out technology to fix that Pika matchup, I mean, you could just add a Claims and Clone in the deck, I guess. But I don't know, Lugia is still doing Lugia things. I just don't think it's as good as it used to be. But it's another deck that I'm going to be surprised if one actually made top 8. It's Lugia, right? It's a very strong deck. It just, I mean, the power of this deck is still very much there. So there's a good chance Lugia still makes top 8, even if I don't think it's the best play for the tournament. I want to talk about the new decks now. Hydreigon. Now, Hydreigon is getting a lot of hype right now. It's doing really good in the online tournaments. In fact, it's already won 3 online tournaments. So the deck is starting to pick up some groundswell. Now, the question is, can Hydreigon have a good weekend? Will it do well this weekend, or will it flop? Now, in my opinion, I think Hydreigon is a good deck. My issue with it right now is nobody has figured out the best way to play it. I think that this, control build is very strong, and I think there is potential for, a control build of Hydreigon. I call it a control deck, but they, just cards like Eerie, Zerosic, Misfortune Sister, stuff like that. I think there is potential for Hydreigon. The potential is not there, but I do want Hydreigon to do well. Now, yesterday, or the day before, when I did the tier list video, I put it in D tier. I think I would bump it up to probably low B tier, maybe C tier. That's why I would rearrange that tier list. I kind of underrepresented Hydreigon, but I think Hydreigon will see play. It's not going to be very popular because I don't think people are sold on the deck yet. I don't think enough people are going to play because they're not sold on it. I do think, though, maybe a couple players will have a good run with it. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw 2 or 3 in day 2, and hopefully we see one do well. I mean, the dream would be to get top 8. I don't think it's going to happen, but I would like to see Hydreigon do good. Because one thing with Hydreigon, especially if you're playing this control build, I think you're pretty good into most of the top decks like Charizard, Gardevoir. I think you have a great Lost Box matchup, especially if you're playing Eerie and Zerosic. Ceruledge is another new deck. I wouldn't be surprised to see Ceruledge do good. This is a deck that has top 32/top 16 written all over it. I mean, yeah, Ceruledge seems like it's a pretty playable deck for this weekend. It's basically like, the big turbo beat stick deck. I think the Palkia build is still the optimal way to play it. Like Raging Bolt, it's just one of those big, fast, like, hit hard, can you respond to my KOs in time or else I win the game? So yeah, very good chance Ceruledge does good at this tournament. Like, this deck is definitely a deck that, would probably make a good top 32 run. Like, a top 32 Ceruledge placement is not surprising to see. Next up is Palkia Dusknoir, another deck that I think is kind of underrepresented right now. I don't think the deck is as good as it was in the Stellar format, but I think this deck is still fairly powerful. The one thing I will say, if you're playing this deck, you do have access to Greninja EX, which gives you a better time versus something like Miraidon. See, I do think Palkia is actually not in a bad spot right now. Wouldn't be surprised if a couple of Palkia did good at this tournament. Maybe even top 8, maybe. Palkia Noctowl is another deck that has been getting a little bit of hype since LEIC. It got second place in the Seniors Division. This deck is still strong. It's got a lot of cool things it can do. Noctowl engine is ridiculously bonkers. We've seen the Palkia build with the bugs, the Volbeat Illumise package. Yeah, another deck that I don't think this is going to be as popular as Dusknoir Palkia, but I wouldn't be surprised if a couple Jet Pelks or Palkia Terapagos, whatever you call it, makes day 2. All right, Dragapult time. Now, Dragapult is another deck that kind of feels like an underdog in the format. It's been doing okay in the online tournaments, and I don't think going into this format, this deck is not that bad. I mean, it's still Dragapult. It's still very strong. There's a reason why Regidrago is the best all-around deck right now. I think Dragapult is very powerful. Not going to be popular, though I think people are going to stick with it and still play it to this tournament. I think the Dusknoir build is the better build. I think the Pidgeot build is a little bit risky right now, just because there's more lightning in the format, right, with the Miraidons and the Pika Lost Box. If I was playing Dragapult, I would not play Pidgeot. Just Pidgeot doesn't seem great right now. But I think Dragapult is still a good deck. I think it can beat a lot of stuff still. It's still an underrepresented deck in this format. And I think if you can, like, with the Dusknoir build, if you can establish a good board versus Miraidon, I think you easily beat them. You can beat Pika Lost Box. You can, put up a good fight most of everything in the format. Iron Thorns. This deck is probably still okay. I don't think it's actually as good as it used to be. I think it's gaining bad matchups now with Pika Lost Box. I think Miraidon's kind of iffy now that they have Magneton, which can be a really good counter to Crushing Hammer. Yeah, Iron Thorns is like kind of, it's okay. My issue with Iron Thorns, so you're playing a deck that you're trying to get an auto win against a deck that is starting to fall off. It doesn't seem very good to me. So, I don't know. Thorns is probably not a great spot. It's just one of those decks, though, that will randomly do good in the tournament because it's just such a cheesy deck. You're going to win games because your opponent can't do anything. Maybe Thorns has to adapt and play some other engines. All right, Gholdengo. Another deck that got a lot of hype at the start of the format, but now the hype has faded a little bit. I think the deck is still really good, though. It's one of those, like, decks that nobody really respects for whatever reason, even though the deck's that good. It's a deck that, can win a tournament. I mean, we saw it got top 4 at LEIC. Gholdengo is a very powerful deck, and I think that we're still trying to figure out the best builds of it. Like, is it good with Energy Search Pro? Do you want to play with Dusknoir or Togekiss? Do you still play Palkia? Do you still play Prime Catcher? Like, all these different, builds are still up in the air. So I think Gholdengo is still gonna do well. I don't know. People just haven't cracked the code on it, I feel like. But I wouldn't be surprised if, Gholdengo had, like, a decent run at Sacramento. All right, Turbo Moon. Another big turbo deck. We did see it do good at LEIC. It doesn't really gain any new cards. Maybe you play the new Miraidon, but overall, Turbo Moon is still just kind of a pretty solid turbo deck. It probably is it's a little bit worse than Miraidon, I will say, though. Because, like, it's worse than Miraidon and Raging Bolt. You don't have the ability to be as bulky with Raging Bolt, and you don't have the ability to take advantage of all these different options, like with Miraidon. So Roaring Moon just ends up being a little bit too linear. It's not a terrible play, though, and, a couple in day 2 wouldn't be shocking to see. Ancient Box is an interesting one. I think this deck is actually a very underrepresented deck, and this deck actually could make a bit of a comeback this format. This deck has a good matchup against a lot of these new decks. It's got a good Lost Box matchup. It's got a good Drago matchup. Its Drago matchup is actually kind of close, but it's, you can beat it. Your matchup into, like, Miraidon solid. You have a good Raging Bolt matchup. You're actually good against a lot of these new big decks coming out of this format. I think your matchup versus Terapagos is close. Your probably worst matchup is going to be Charizard, obviously, and probably any deck with Noivern. But yeah, I do think that Roaring Moon, Ancient Box, whatever you call it, Ancient Box might make a comeback. I wouldn't be surprised if a few players played it this weekend and did well with it. It's definitely a deck that definitely is on the cusp of a comeback in this meta. All right, another new deck I want to mention is Archaludon. A lot of people are trying to make this deck work. A lot of people wanted to do good. This build here I got pulled up, won an online tournament. This deck clearly has potential. The potential is there. Somebody just needs to figure out a good 60. So I think if Archaludon has a deep run at Sacramento, or a couple make it to day 2, this could be the time for Archaludons to start picking up in popularity. Just want to put that out there. It's another deck that you can make day 2. Now, Stall is interesting. Snorlax actually is good right now. Not many people are respecting it, which is always a good thing for Snorlax. Snorlax is also a very strong deck in a new format. And I think that it's, wouldn't be surprised if Snorlax made it all the way to, like, top 16. Pidgey Control is another interesting one. It's another deck that, like Snorlax, is very good, especially at the start of the format. The problem with Pidgey Control is harder to play, and it's going to be less popular than Snorlax. Like, less good players would play Pidgeot over playing something like Snorlax Stall, but Pidgeot Control has been killing it in the online tournaments this past, like, week or so, and it's a deck that if somebody were to, pick up and do well with, or learn, I think that there's a very good chance we could see a Pidgeot Control in, like, top 32 of the tournament. And then finally, in the control area, we got the Milotic and Walls deck. This wall, attack, stall, whatever you call it, type of deck. I think it's very new to the scene, but there's a good chance that some players play this Milotic wall toolbox deck and do well with it. I think that is very much going to happen this weekend. Wouldn't be surprised if somebody made it to, like, top 16, maybe even top 32. Top 32, top 16, maybe, with a Milotic deck. Very good chance that can happen. Just have to figure out the best walls to play it with, the best engine, the best build. Good chance this type of deck starts getting a name for itself this weekend at SAC. Gouging Fire, another underrated deck in the format. I think this deck's good. I mean, it's been doing good in the recent, the recent IC, the recent regionals. Good chance Gouging Fire has some good performances. Latias is a great new card for the deck, and it does have some cool counterplays with Fluttermane and Monkey Dory, which is nice. It's like it's the 4th big basic turbo deck in the format. I would probably rank it above Roid Moon, maybe below Raging Bolt and Miraidon. It's kind of in the middle. It's not a bad deck, though, for sure. And then we got Cloth. I didn't put this on the tier list. If I did, I'd probably put it at, like, low B tier, maybe C tier. Cloth's pretty good. I think a lot of people are not sleeping on it, but just not really thinking about it, and, that's a good thing for this deck. I don't think it's ever popular, but, I mean, Cloth's been consistently getting performances recently, and I think that's kind of a big deal. How will it do in this new format? I'm not sure. It does seem to have a cool matchup versus stuff with Pikachu. Your Miraidon matchup should be pretty good, too. Like, you're kind of just a beat stick deck that I think does have the potential to do well this weekend. I don't know. We'll see where Cloth goes. Next up is Bayonet, a deck that definitely is probably falling off a little bit. It's probably not going to be very popular, but it's another deck that I wouldn't be surprised if, people are sticking with it and are just going to play it as this tournament after playing it from the past format, and it ends up doing good this weekend. Good chance that does end up happening, even though I think the deck is falling off a little bit. All right, I do want to mention Charizard Terapagos too, a deck that did pretty good at LEIC. This deck might start getting more attention in this new format now that, the LEIC is over and we have more time. The deck still probably stays good in this new format. You do gain Terra Orb, which is a really cool upgrade to the deck. Charizard Terapagos is a very strong deck. I think it's a very scary deck, and I think that if people start playing with it, this deck could end up getting popular. It'll probably add into the Charizard meta share. So when I go to the meta share for Charizard, I have it a little bit higher because there's, you're combining the two different Zard decks. Then we got Shempao, a deck that has kind of died off a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if, like, somebody made day 2 with it. It's now playing Greninja, and I think Greninja is a really cool addition to the deck. I don't know. It'd be cool to see Shempao Greninja do well. I don't know. I just wanted to mention that. I have a couple other wild cards I want to name real quick here. The first one is Sablezard. This deck, if you're going to play Sablezard, it's probably not a bad time to play it right now. Sablezard is not as strong as Pika Lost Box, but it does have a lot of really cool things it can do. The Charizard is a great attacker. You are a stronger, like, single prize Lost Zone deck. You're favored into the Pika Mirror, or the Pikachu Lost Box deck, I should say. And if decks like Lugia are starting to fall off, it's a good thing for this deck, right? I think that Sablezard is a legit decent deck, and I wouldn't be surprised if, maybe 1 or 2 got day 2. It's not as popular as the other Lost Zone builds, but it making day 2 is not surprising. Now, the final wild card I got is Flygon. I want to see somebody make day 2 at Sacramento with Flygon. I want to see it happen. I'm going to call Flygon a wild card. Of all the wild card decks, I want to see a Flygon deck make day 2. I think that'd be pretty dope to see. So, yeah, I got Flygon on my list here. All right. Finally, we got the meta share for this tournament. I do have Raging Bolt at 12%. Pretty good chance it's still going to be the most played deck. I don't think Raging Bolt is as good right now in this format compared to last format, but I think that it's still going to be very popular. 12% meta is probably pretty fair for it. Then I got Lost Box and Miraidon, both at 9%. These new, well, not really new, but like decks that are getting good again. I think people are just bored of playing the same old crap from the last format. They're just going to want to play stuff like Lost Box, Miraidon. I can see both variants being high as 9%. Miraidon is actually maybe a bit higher. Like, Miraidon low-key could be a 10% deck. Probably not, though. It's not that... I mean, it's good, but I just don't think it's going to be that popular. But I do think there's a good chance both Miraidon and Lost Box end up being very popular at this tournament, both around 9% meta share. Lost Box maybe goes down to 8%, not 9. 9 might be a little bit too high for it, but Miraidon definitely wouldn't be surprised if it's like 9%. I got Zard at 8%. Zard, everyone loves Zard, right? And Zard's still good. I mean, it's favored, it should be anyways, into a lot of the big decks other than Drago. Wouldn't be surprised if Charizard was like an 8% meta deck, especially if people are playing the Terapagos build that just kind of combines the two together. I got Drago at 7%. That's probably a little too low. Drago's probably actually an 8% deck now that I'm thinking about it, but definitely going to be in that like 8 to 7% range. Lugia will probably be 7%. This deck is falling off in my opinion, but I think there's going to be enough people still playing the deck that will keep it alive. It's still going to be at least 7 to 6% of the meta. Gardevoir, probably 6%. There's enough Guardy believers to keep it high up on this list, so 6%. Terapagos also, like Terapagos, Guardy, both are probably just going to be like 6% meta decks. Ceruledge, I'm going to have at 4%. Maybe 5%. Yeah, 5% is probably a little bit more fair for Ceruledge, in all honesty, now that I think about it. Yeah, Ceruledge is most likely a 5% meta deck. Yeah, I think it's fine. Gholdengo will be around 4. Same with Dragapult, Dusknoir. Palkia decks are going to be at 4%. Palkia should probably be a bit higher, actually, if we're combining the two together. So I'm probably going to go Palkia Noctowl to 6% if we're combining the Palk variants together. 6% seems fair for that. I'm going to put Hydreigon at 3%. Again, it's a very new deck. Nobody has really cracked the code on it. I think a lot of people are skeptical about the deck, even though it has started to make a name for itself. I think people are still skeptical, and that's going to hold the deck back a little bit. But I think 3% fairly, accurate. I think there will be enough people who will play it now that it has been getting results. Yeah, and I got Stall probably at like 2-3%. Yeah, Ancient Box Thorns. Like, I think Thorns is probably 3%, not 2%, but the deck is feeling a little bit worse in this meta right now, in my opinion. But that's my meta predictions for the Sacramento Regional Championships. I cannot wait to watch it. I'm low-key wishing I went to this tournament, man. I wish I went. I mean, it is what it is. I wanted to go. Like, it sucks that they had to make the first Surging Sparks legal format in the Sacramento Regionals, not LAIC. But whatever, it is what it is. I'm excited, and hopefully we see some cool results. And yeah, hopefully my meta predictions are fairly accurate. But yeah, I guess if I were to make a guess on like what deck can win the tournament, I think Drago's got the highest chance of winning the tournament. But like, definitely can see Lost Box, Miraidon win a tournament, Gardevoir, Terapagos, like any of these like decks that are in the 6% range probably can win the tournament. In all honesty, Ceruledge easily top 32 deck, Gholdengo top 32, Dragapult top 32. We'll see if a Hydreigon goes any higher than top 64. It's definitely top 32 wouldn't be surprising, but I'll see if Hydreigon goes any higher than like top 64. That'll be interesting to see regardless. But I hope you all enjoyed the video on the meta predictions. If you did, leave a like. If you're new to the channel, subscribe down below. Once again, we're on the road to 19K subs. Let me know what your meta predictions are for Sacramento this weekend, and I'll catch you all later. Bye-bye.